In the candlelit chambers of medieval Europe, the cries of labor were often confused with the echoes of death. Behind silk curtains and golden headboards, noble women, cloaked in wealth but stripped of mercy, faced childbirth with trembling dread. To give life was to gamble one's own, and the stakes were final. No crown, no dowry, no divine prayer could shield them from what was to come. For these women, childbirth wasn't a celebration. It was a confrontation with mortality itself. And tonight, we descend into that forgotten terror. If you're drawn to the lost truths of history, like and subscribe. Picture a noble woman in her prime, draped in velvet, perfumed with rose water, yet haunted by the silent specter of death that lingered near her bed. Beneath her jewels, her pulse raced not with excitement, but with fear. Servants whispered of women who had entered the birthing room radiant and left cold. Blood loss, infection, fever, their names varied, but the end was the same. In a world where medicine was faith and ignorance was law, every contraction could mean farewell. The room was suffocating, thick with incense, sweat, and whispered prayers. Midwives surrounded the bed, armed with herbs and superstition. There were no sterile tools, no anesthesia, only trembling hands and divine hope. The priest stood nearby, ready to deliver last rites if the screams turned hollow. Outside, the husband waited, pacing between guilt and dread, knowing he could lose both wife and child before dawn. The palace walls, carved with the triumphs of kings, could not silence the primal terror within. In medieval Europe, childbirth was so perilous that noble women often wrote their wills before labor began. Letters sealed in wax spoke of heirlooms, apologies, and unspoken love. Some begged forgiveness for not bearing more sons. Others prayed their names would be remembered kindly. Mortality rates soared. Records show that up to 1 in 3 noble women died from complications of childbirth. And yet, despite their suffering, society saw their deaths as duty fulfilled, martyrs of lineage, sacrifices for bloodlines. This was the cruel paradox of privilege. Noble women were treasured as vessels for dynasties, yet treated as expendable. They were the bridges between alliances, the wombs of kingdoms. Their deaths were mourned in poetry but forgotten in practice. Physicians, when summoned, relied more on astrology than science. Some timed deliveries by the stars, others bled the patient to balance the humors. The body became an experiment wrapped in lace. And while men battled on fields of war, women waged a quieter, bloodier war beneath their own roofs. Imagine being told that your purpose was to birth an heir, and that your life was the acceptable price for it. Young brides, barely women, were thrust into royal marriages, their bodies treated as political investments. They learned to smile for portraits, to host grand feasts, and to die gracefully if childbirth demanded it. Behind their painted serenity lay fear, despair, and the muffled sobs of those who knew what awaited. A noblewoman's crown glittered, but it was forged from quiet suffering. Some whispered charms against death, amulets sewn into gowns, verses etched in silver crosses. Others sought forbidden remedies from village healers, risking scandal for a chance at survival. The church warned against pagan midwives, yet when holy prayers failed, desperation silenced faith. The irony was cruel. In their gilded halls, surrounded by wealth, noble women envied the peasants' simplicity, their freedom to labor in private, their chance, however slim, to survive unnoticed. Hygiene was non-existent. Instruments were rarely cleaned, and hands often unwashed. Midwives used oils and herbs believed to open the womb, but infections followed swiftly. The dreaded childbed fever could claim a mother within days. Her skin turned ghostly, her body convulsed with chills, and her breath reeked of decay. Doctors, unable to comprehend infection, called it divine punishment. For many noblemen, grief was a brief intermission before another marriage, another gamble with fate. History remembers the kings who built empires, but seldom the women who died building them. Queen Jane Seymour, the beloved wife of Henry VIII, gave England its heir and her life in return. She succumbed to puerperal fever, her body consumed by infection. In France, Queen Claude died the same way, her body ravaged by endless pregnancies. Even Catherine Parr, who outlived the monstrous Henry, met death through childbirth's curse. To be royal was not to be safe. It was to live beneath the shadow of the cradle. The plague swept through Europe like divine wrath, but for noble women, childbirth was a more intimate apocalypse. The Black Death struck indiscriminately, but labor waited patiently, claiming its victims with surgical cruelty. And unlike the plague, there was no escape, no isolation, no flight, no mercy. A noble woman could flee armies, flee assassins, but never her own body. And when death came, it came softly, through a whispered prayer and the silence of stillborn cries. The tragedy deepened when religion entered the chamber. The church viewed childbirth pain as Eve's punishment. In sorrow shalt thou bring forth children. To ease the pain was to defy God's will. So women endured in agony, their screams sanctified by Scripture. And when they died, priests spoke of divine purpose rather than preventable horror. Their deaths became morality tales, not medical failures. Each grave was an altar to obedience. Imagine the midnight candlelight reflecting off sweat-drenched faces, the air heavy with desperation, the midwife whispering, "Push, my lady," as the priest mumbles Latin prayers. A scream cuts through the night, a cry too human for the marble walls that surround it. Then silence. Outside, the city sleeps, unaware that another noble line has lost its matriarch. The dawn brings banners of mourning and servants in black. The cradle remains empty. When noble women survived, the scars were not just physical. Many lived with trauma, haunted by the memory of childbirth's shadow. Some withdrew from court, pale and ghost-like, unable to bear the thought of another pregnancy. Others turned to faith, their prayers half gratitude, half bargaining. But kings demanded heirs, and duty did not pause for fear. A single survivor might be forced to endure the ritual again and again until it killed her. Medicine evolved slowly. By the Renaissance, physicians experimented with forceps, crude metal tools that tore flesh as often as they saved lives. They called it progress. Women called it torment. And while scholars debated anatomy in universities, noble women continued to die in silk sheets, their final breath lost in candle smoke. The men who studied their corpses wrote elegant treatises. The women who birthed their heirs were buried quietly, their names fading beneath marble epitaphs. The emotional toll reached across generations. Daughters grew up knowing their mothers had died, giving them life. They were raised to understand that the same fate awaited them. Portraits of beauty and grace hung in corridors, concealing histories written in blood. To marry was to walk willingly toward danger, to exchange youth for lineage, love for duty. Fear became inheritance. Silence became tradition. Even queens, those untouchable symbols of divine power, were prisoners of biology. They might command nations, yet they could not command mercy. Marie de Medici, Queen of France, suffered through 6 brutal labors. Her letters to relatives read like confessions of terror. "Pray," she wrote, "that God spares me once more." She was not weak. She was simply human, standing against nature with nothing but faith and endurance. Each birth was a victory stolen from death. The tragedy was systemic. The very institutions meant to protect noble women, religion, medicine, monarchy, betrayed them. Knowledge was forbidden to women, so they could not understand their own peril. Physicians viewed the female body as mysterious and impure, governed by humors and hysteria. When a mother died, it was her fault, her sin, her weakness. History carved her suffering into silence. Yet whispers of rebellion existed. Some noble women, educated by secret tutors, questioned their confinement. They wrote letters pleading for safer practices, for midwives to be trained, for childbirth to be treated as science, not divine punishment. Their efforts were quiet, often ignored, but they lit the first sparks of reform. They were the silent revolutionaries of survival. Childbirth in noble courts was a spectacle. Servants, priests, attendants, even political envoys gathered to witness the heir's arrival. The mother became a public exhibit of virtue and pain. Her suffering was entertainment wrapped in piety. Only when she screamed too long or bled too much did faces turn solemn. The same crowd that cheered her courage would whisper rumors if she failed to produce a son. Her agony was both spectacle and shame. It was not uncommon for noble women to beg midwives for mercy, to end their suffering by any means. Some are said to have swallowed opium or herbs to dull the agony, risking death before labor could finish it. In hushed tones, attendants would speak of the merciful end, a poison mistaken for prayer. Even in their final moments, these women were denied control. Their bodies were political, their deaths ceremonial. The surviving infants were often hailed as miracles, symbols of divine favor. Yet their mothers' names faded behind theirs. History crowned the sons, but buried the mothers. The cradle, swathed in silk, became a symbol of both triumph and tragedy. And as generations passed, the pattern repeated: noble women conceiving heirs, dying for lineage, and being replaced before their portraits gathered dust. Meanwhile, physicians began documenting maternal deaths more closely. Their records reveal the grim statistics: hemorrhage, eclampsia, infection, the silent trio that claimed countless lives. Each entry a brief note, each death reduced to data. Yet behind every number lay a human story: fear, hope, agony, silence. The noblewoman's tragedy became a footnote in medical progress, her voice erased by clinical detachment. By the Enlightenment, some began to question the cruelty. Midwives like Louise Bourgeois in France championed sanitation and technique, saving lives where superstition once reigned. But reform came too late for centuries of women who had already died. Their ghosts haunted palace corridors, their portraits staring with knowing eyes. The candles flickered beside cradles that had once been coffins. The comparison to the plague is no exaggeration. During outbreaks, people fled cities to survive. But noble women could not flee childbirth. They could not escape the fate written in their wombs. For them, labor was the ultimate contagion, inescapable, recurrent, merciless. The fear was generational, so deeply ingrained that some noble women preferred chastity to marriage. To live barren was to live free. Imagine the quiet after birth, the soft coo of an infant beside a still mother. The servants bow their heads, tears falling silently. The husband orders the bells to toll, not in joy but in mourning. Outside, the peasants celebrate a new heir, unaware that a queen has paid the price. The kingdom thrives on a widow's grief. History moves on. We rarely think of childbirth as warfare, yet for noble women, it was exactly that. Their battlegrounds were bedsheets. Their weapons, faith, endurance, and luck. There were no victories, only survivors. They did not die of weakness, but of a world that refused to see their strength. And while men wore armor, women wore courage beneath their gowns. Modern science would one day conquer the terrors that killed them: antiseptics, anesthesia, surgical precision. But their suffering remains the foundation of progress. Every life saved today stands on the unmarked graves of women who bled for knowledge. They were the unsung architects of human survival. The noblewoman's fear of childbirth wasn't cowardice. It was wisdom born of experience. She had seen her mother die, her sister fade, her maid collapse. She knew that childbirth was a sacred gamble, where faith and fate clashed in silence. Her courage lay not in ignoring the fear, but in facing it anyway. And so, when we read their letters, their confessions, their last words, we hear echoes of humanity untouched by time. These women lived beautifully, suffered privately, and died for a future they would never see. The plague took millions, but childbirth stole generations. One cradle at a time. History often crowns its heroes in armor, not in linen. But the true martyrs of survival were the noble women who dared to give life when death awaited. Their courage deserves remembrance, not as victims, but as warriors of endurance. So, if you honor their strength, their silence, and their sacrifice, like this video, subscribe for more stories from the forgotten corners of history, and I'll see you in the next one.